And I should confess first and foremost that I'm a little bit of an oddball in that I do not have a drone background. And Field Ready that we work with actually does not historically use drones either. But I think a lot of the work we do has actually a lot of potential for us to be able to collaborate. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do together in terms of drone ports. Now, when we look at drone ports, we're not just looking at what's the infrastructure required for being able to have a place where a drone can land and take off, but we're also looking at a potential spot within the community in which the drone is coming and going, and which other activities around it can start to happen, in which different channels of economic flow can start to come into communities in new ways. And that's what I'm going to talk a little bit about today as I talk about the work that we do at Field Ready. So Field Ready is a humanitarian aid organization. And what we do is we use digital manufacturing techniques to be able to short-circuit supply chains in areas where there may not be any other supply chain available, like such as a disaster setting or an exceptionally rural area. If we look at most supply chains the way they exist right now, there's going to be a whole lot of layers from in between the manufacturer and the community who actually ends up using a product. They're going to go through warehouses, there's going to be planes, trains, automobiles in order to get the products to the end user. So with Field Ready, our goal is to cut out as much of that as we can. We want to look to how we can bring the manufacturing of products to the places where the products are needed. Not only does this cut down on time, you don't have to worry about delivery, but you also are able to reduce cost along the way as well, because you aren't paying for all this transportation and warehousing. And so our general strategy is all dependent upon using digital manufacturing techniques. And so as we heard from our friends at Gearbox this morning, this actually encompasses a wide variety of technologies, whether that's 3D printing, laser cutting, plasma cutting, CNC milling. There's a whole range of different digital manufacturing techniques that we employ. And these techniques, though, all generally work on the same basic strategy, in that if you have an identified product need, if there's something that someone needs within the community, all you have to do is create a digital model on the computer, send it via code to the machine, and the machine is able to create a product that's either an end product or a near end product that can go immediately to be used. Now, most of the time, these technologies are being used for prototyping, but in reality, they are getting mature enough to the point where they are able to be used for a whole variety of end-use parts. And because these machines are significantly smaller and more portable than a standard manufacturing piece of equipment, they can go places where other manufacturing equipment can't always go. They can go to places where a factory isn't always there. And so this presents some interesting opportunities as we think about the rural communities around Lake Victoria. If drone ports are places where all this shipping and commerce is starting to happen, are able to be supported by some of these digital manufacturing techniques, we have not only a transportation method that can go anywhere or almost anywhere with drones, but we have machines that can make almost anything with digital manufacturing. We can imagine a hub in Wanza which is able to create custom products as required upon demand and send them out to the various drone ports available in Lake Victoria communities. However, an important question before we start getting down alleys like this is to avoid being too hypothetical, is to think about what are the actual product needs that people are seeing? What are the actual difficult product needs that people are seeing? What are some of the items that the people living in the rural areas around Lake Victoria have a difficult time getting right now? And how could a combination of drones and digital manufacturing techniques be able to meet some of those challenges? So in the lead up to this conference, I spent 10 days actually on the islands of Lake Victoria. I spent a few days on Ukerewe, some time on Ukara, and some time on Juma Island to do a series of interviews with people coming from all different walks of life. Doctors, engineers, blacksmiths, et cetera, people who are active and doing work that requires equipment to make their livelihood happen. And I was asking them, what are the things that they really struggle to get? What are the items that they use in their day-to-day life that is a challenge? We've already seen the great things that drone technology can do for delivering medicines or blood samples and testing, but are there other greater uses that it could have, especially when it's augmented with something like digital manufacturing? And from that, I was able to kind of come up with some key focus areas that can kind of allow us to start getting a little bit more concrete in terms of what a business model could be to serve some of these underserved communities with items that they are kind of struggling to get right now. And there's a lot of people out there who are using various small machines to just have their day-to-day livelihood happen. A lot of tailors, a lot of people who run small copier stands, people who use photocopy machines. That is where their day-to-day livelihood is happening right now. And as those machines are all different and they all use different components, it's not uncommon for some of those components to routinely break. When those components break, if you're living on one of the smaller islands, you have no option but to go all the way to Mwanza to look for a new one. And as parts aren't standardized across products, there's a good chance you're going to have to do a significant amount of hunting because the spares market even here in Mwanza is a little sporadic. So a lot of people are losing not just the money that it costs to make a spare for a small machinery, but they're also losing all the time that they could have been working while they're traveling, and they're losing the cost it takes to transport. Not to mention that with local manufacturing, even without these extra costs, is often far cheaper. We can see by 3D printing some gears like that, we can make it for almost a tenth of the price. There's also a number of technologies that people are interested in that could have a big impact on their lives that they don't have access to right now. And the reason isn't necessarily as intuitive as you might think. You can order an irrigation kit, including small parts like this in Mwanza, but it's not going to come from Mwanza. It'll be delivered from Arusha or Dar or Nairobi. And by the time it gets to you, it'll be at least a month. And while irrigation is actually highly needed in a lot of the rural areas around Mwanza, a lot of people aren't doing it. And when I talk to farmers about this, their answer was generally, sure, I can order the kit, but what happens the first time it breaks? I can't wait another month until a part is delivered the first time my cow steps on a sprinkler. It's not financially, it doesn't make financially sense. I need to be able to have a way to quickly get spare parts and repair this large system that I'm investing in. Along with irrigation in general, pumps are a major issue everywhere I went. As soon as you bring up pumps, people sigh and talk about, oh, pumps, where am I going to get spare parts? For something so vital as delivering water, being able to manufacture locally the parts needed to repair these could have a huge impact. Now, not all of the needs that people were showing me on the islands are necessarily involving urgency or short-term needs, but they are high-impact needs. I met with a number of teachers who told me about how difficult it is to teach science in a rural secondary school when it's difficult to get the parts and equipment that they need. You can't get kids engaged in science, and you can't raise up the next generation of engineers and scientists when they can't participate in the lab. Kids get turned off and they turn away. But school budgets are too tight to make this equipment available to everyone. They also gave me examples of physiotherapy devices. There's all kinds of assistive devices that people with disabilities in rural areas can currently not access because they're too expensive. And even if they could afford them, they're not exactly sure where to go to get them because they're coming from rural areas, and these devices are being imported into the major cities. Something like this, a Dobbs clubfoot brace used to treat infants, is $300 to import right now and could make a huge difference in a child's life. With 3D printing, we've demonstrated that this can be made in an open source design for $10 US. It's a major cost reduction in making an item available that wasn't previously available. Some of the biggest, though, and we kind of keep ramping up here and how big of an impact these can be, is medical spare parts. So we look right now at an example of this machine. There's a belt on it that routinely wears out. Because this belt is specialized, and they only make so many of them, to get a new one involves going to Dar and paying the equivalent of $130 US just for a small plastic belt. With something like localized 3D printing with localized manufacturing with 3D printing, we could manufacture something like this on site in a rural hospital where this photo was taken for less than $1. And this is kind of a case, again, over and over again with hospital spare parts. I've spent a lot of time here and elsewhere looking into this. And there's a lot of machines in which there is no supply chain right now for spares. An example of this suction machine used in surgeries, when this part fails, the machine is done, unless someone can happen to find another broken machine and take the part off that one. In this case, something like this, though, this small plastic valve is all that needs to be replaced. And on a 3D printer, we could easily repair that in a matter of hours for less than $1 as well. And this is a recurring thing. Even within the last 10 days, and I was only spending part of my time focused on health, I came across dozens of examples of medical devices that required spare parts, and yet the people who were working in these facilities had no access to spare parts. whether due to logistics or finances. And this is reflected in the fact that it's estimated, the lowest estimate I've seen is that 40% of medical equipment in rural sub-Saharan Africa is currently derelict right now. And a huge contributor to that is spare parts. Probably in the Ukerewe Islands alone, there's at least tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of medical equipment that is sitting there that is unable to be used. Being able to manufacture spare parts locally could have a huge impact in restoring that equipment. Now, granted, I chose some pretty extreme examples out of my findings from these last few weeks to show you, but we can see how by using some of these manufacturing techniques, there's major cost savings that can be had in a lot of products. Not only that, but these products are all having to be attained from somewhere far away, and they're actually all fairly lightweight products too. And so as we go back to this model of a drone port, we can imagine a hub in which a lot of these goods are able to be restored, where thousands of dollars of idle equipment across all of these sectors is able to be restored quickly, efficiently, and cheaply. We can imagine a workflow in which someone identifies something that they need to have replaced, and they go to their local drone port, either on foot or they send it to the main drone port in Mwanza to be repaired. A local maker is able to take that part that needs to be replaced, create a new one, catalog that design, and then return it to them. And with how massive the savings are on some of these parts that we're seeing, like how big the reduction in cost is, there's room for both the entrepreneur, whether it's a youth from the community that's received some training or not, to be able to make a substantial profit while the customer is also receiving a product that they need for substantially lower than they would have paid otherwise. And so this creates a very exciting opportunity for what drone ports could be. In terms of, again, this whole idea of being able to make anything and be able to deliver it anywhere. But I think models like this, where there's kind of a central manufacturing hub, is really just the start. As I spoke to people, what got people really excited was about the ability not just to get a hold of goods and services that they needed at a lower price or faster or more efficiently, but they got really excited about the idea of being able to manufacture within their own community. And as we continue to talk about tomorrow drone ports and what they could be, there's a lot of potential for them to be their own smaller scale manufacturing hubs that are able to be supported by maybe a larger hub in Mwanza. In this case, community members are becoming not only consumers of products, they're not just taking from Mwanza as is, but they are actually producing for themselves, creating their own profit centers within their communities, and perhaps being able to trade and exchange with the other communities around them as well. This allows them to have much more control over their own economic futures, and it creates a much more democratic manufacturing process where there's much less dependency in the system and people are empowered. So I threw a lot at you. I'm excited to talk more about it tomorrow in the drone port track. I think there's a lot more for us to talk about what drone ports could be, and I'm excited to continue learning more about the thoughts and experiences that people in that group have. Feel free to contact me. All right, thank you very much.